Hey everyone, so today I want to talk about some rulings that all Cyber Dragon players should know. Now, John from Team Set Pass made a great video a few months back, and I just wanted to cover some additional rulings that I think will be helpful, especially for newer players. And so make sure to check out that video by Team Set Pass if you haven't already. And since I won't be talking about any of the rulings covered in that video, I'll put a link in the description so you can go watch that. So the first card we're going to talk about is Chimeratech Rampage Dragon and how its effect to pop spell and traps can miss timing. So the first part of its effect states that when this card is fusion summoned, you can target spell traps up to the number of materials used for its fusion summon and destroy them. So a when you can, or also known as when optional effects, can only be activated when its activation condition was one of the last things to happen. And I know that still sounds really confusing, so I'm going to provide a link in the description that provides a great explanation of card effects missing timing. So to make it simpler, let's just do an example. So let's say that we have a set Cyberload fusion and the right fusion materials, and our opponent activates Cosmic Cyclone as Chainlink 1, targets our set. We chain Cyberload Fusion as Chainlink 2, and go into Rampage Dragon. And now chain resolves backwards, so Cosmic Cyclone now banishes Cyberload Fusion. And at this point, the summon was not the last thing to happen. It was actually Cyclone resolving, so in this instance, Rampage will miss timing and it will not destroy spell traps on the field. So to simplify it even further, all you have to know is that you have to activate Cyberload Fusion as Chainlink 1. That way, Chimeratech Rampage won't miss timing and it can destroy spell and traps. And also be aware of activating Cyberload Fusion on resolution after activation of a card. So what I mean by this is, let's say your opponent is playing Pendulums and they activate a scale and then they activate the second scale. And at this point, you're predicting that they're probably going to pen summon. And so you can say something like, on the second scale, activation is fine, but on resolution, and then activate Cyberload Fusion. That way Rampage can come out. This is still Chainlink 1 at this point, and then you can pop both the scales. Now in instances where you have no choice but to activate Cyberload Fusion as Chainlink 2, it's going to be tempting to try to use Rampage's effect anyways to try to pop spell and traps, especially because this whole missing timing thing will be something that a lot of opponents may overlook and won't know, but please don't do this. If you activate as Chainlink 2 or higher, it is going to miss timing. Don't cheat your opponent, don't pop spell and traps. Now speaking of Cyberload Fusion, remember that this card says that only that fusion summon monster can attack for the rest of the turn. So let's say you Cyberload Fusion and you go into Rampage and you subsequently overlay with the Cyber Dragon or level 5 to go into Nova, and then use Nova's effect to detach the Rampage, to bring back the Naxter, and to bring back the Rampage Dragon. So at this point now, this Rampage Dragon is gonna forget that it was summoned off Cyberload Fusion. So now you actually can't attack with any of your monsters this turn, so do be aware of that. So one more thing I want to cover about Rampage Dragon is under situations like Dimension Shifter, Dark Law, or Macrocosmos, where cards sent to grave are banished instead. So with Rampage, it can technically still send cards from deck because it is an effect, not cost, but they are banished instead. And remember, Rampage only gains additional attacks based on the number of monsters sent to graveyard. So in that situation, it's not going to gain any additional attacks. Now, as a side, something like Galaxy Soldier in that situation, with Dark Law and Macrocosmos, it's not going to be able to summon itself because its effect to descend to graveyard to summon it, that's a cost. Whereas something like Naxter, it only actually says discard the card. It doesn't specify that it has to go to graveyard, so you can still use its effect to summon it out. Now the next card I want to talk about is Cyber Repair Plant. Now this card requiring a Cyber Dragon engrave is an activation requirement, but that Cyber Dragon doesn't have to be engraved for it to resolve. So if you have a core engrave and then you activate Repair Plant and then your opponent activates either DD Crow or Call by the Grave, and banishes the Cyber Dragon engrave, this effect is still going to resolve. So this is why whenever I go into Almirage after my normal summon, I always ask my opponent if they have anything on summon, and same goes with when I contact fuse into Mega Fleet, because when you activate Repair Plan and then they try to DD Crow or Call by the Grave and you tell them that it's still going to resolve, some of them can be a little snaky and say, well, no, I'm activating, DD Crow before you activate Repair Plan. You didn't give me a chance to respond, even though I gave a pause. So just to avoid those kind of disputes, I just always make sure to ask them if they have anything on the summon. So the next thing I wanted to cover is contact fusing. So let's just start with the basics. So for one, you can contact fuse using your own set monsters, but you cannot contact fuse your opponent's set monsters, even if somehow you know that they are machine monsters. Now, in a situation like this, where let's say your opponent has a monster negate and destruction on board, and you know that course effect to search on summon is mandatory, so you're worried that it's going to trigger, and all you wanted to do was contact fuse and get rid of their extra monster zone monster. So at this point, you would set, and always ask your opponent if they have any response at this point, or if they have a response on set, because if you do it really quickly where you set and you just say contact fuse, your opponent can, and rightfully so, ask you to put it back because you didn't give them a chance to respond on the set. And now you've given away that you play Cyber Dragons, and in this specific example, they can just bounce back your set. Now, of course, once you set and they say they have no response at this point, then you can't contact fuse, and that is not a chainable action. Now, sticking with the pendulum example, you actually cannot contact fuse away a pendulum monster in the extra monster zone. And this is because Mega Fleet and also Fortress, they specify that fusion materials have to be sent to grave. And as we all know, pendulum monsters, they do not go to grave, they go face up in the extra deck. And this was actually kind of interesting to me because cards like Dimension Shifter, that specifies that cards sent to graveyard will be banished instead, that still applies to pendulum monsters, and they still do get banished rather than, going to the extra deck. But turns out for Mega Fleet or Fortress, in terms of contact fusing, they still have to be able to send to grave, and so that's why you cannot use pendulum monsters in the extra monster zone to go into Mega Fleet. So now let's talk about Chimeratech Fortress Dragon. So Fortress requires an original Cyber Dragon as its material. So that means you can't use a set baby Cyber Dragon to contact fuse with the Jizakuru that you gave to your opponent, because they are not Cyber Dragon unless they are face up. And also, when they're face up, and let's say it gets hit by a card like Impermanence or Effect Veiler or Widow Inker and gets their effects negated, then they are no longer Cyber Dragon, which means they cannot go into Fortress Dragon with this. So another thing to note is that because tokens can't be sent to grave, you cannot use machine tokens to try to go into Fortress. And where this comes up in the current format is when your opponent has no lion token on board, which is machine, you cannot try to get rid of it by going into Fortress Dragon. Now, one interesting thing about Fortress is that it just specifies Cyber Dragon. So if your opponent has Relinquished, or in the more modern era, Anima, and it's equipped with a Cyber Dragon in the Spell and Trap zone, you can actually still contact fuse it away, let's say with Hertz and the equipped Cyber Dragon, and still go into Fortress. Now, to cover some other areas for both Mega Fleet and Fortress, if you're under a situation like Darklaw or Macrocosmos where cards are banished instead of being sent to grave, then you cannot contact fuse into these monsters. Another thing to note is if these cards are hit by effect negation like Effect Veiler, Impermanence, or Widow Anchor, their attacks will go to 0 and they will stay at 0 permanently. And this also applies when they are flip face down by Book of Moon, for example, and then even when you flip face up, they're still going to be at 0. And this is because the definition that gets thrown around is that it forgets the materials used for its summon, so it stays at 0 permanently. And then lastly, note that these monsters cannot be used as fusion material. So you can't just summon your own Cyber Dragon and contact fuse away your opponent's fortress to make your own fortress. So this also means even though they're dark, and that's a popular target for Super Poly, they cannot be used for fusion materials. Now the next one I want to cover is, remember that you can only go into Infinity using Nova as material only once per turn. Now of course, if you can go into it the normal way of using 3 level 6 light machine monsters, then you can summon as many infinities as you can, but do be aware of that restriction, because I'm sure none of us are actually playing a playset of UFO Roid or Cyber Barrier Dragon to go into it the other way. And fun fact, Infinity is actually the first Xyz monster to require a specific type and attribute as its material, so thanks Konami for making it really easy for us. Alright guys, so that's all I have for today. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I did have a few more rulings that I didn't get to cover today, but I think I'll just save that for a future video after I dig up some other rulings and compile a part 2 video. And so I hope you stay tuned, because next up I'll be bringing an updated Cyber Dragon deck profile for the current format. I know I said that in the last video, but I thought this ruling video was more interesting, so I wanted to get this one out first. But anyways, thank you all very much and take care.